Okay, so welcome to 521. This is week 4 of the quarter, and I'm Beth Kolko here with Julie Kientz, and really delighted to introduce our speaker for this week, Lisa Kamm from the New York Times. And Lisa is a product leader, so she's a SVP leading the core platforms mission at the New York Times. When we chatted about this presentation, she said, well, if the students don't have enough questions, she can always talk about integrating Wordle. So if you're a Wordle player, you might want to ask about that. Lisa spent 12 years at Google, where she served as the first product manager for internal customer support platforms, and fun fact, worked with one of our other alum, which is how we became introduced. And she really has positioned herself as a user-centered product leader since, sounds like, from the beginning of her career. We actually went to the same college, but I don't think that we knew one another. So she's got an undergraduate degree in government, a law degree, and right? Do I have that right?
You do have that right.
Yeah.
That was a weird side track.
It was confusing when I read it, so that's why I had trouble integrating it, but then went to get a master's degree in information management. So she's been doing UX related work for a very long time in a variety of different organizations. Really excited to welcome her here today to share with us her journey, some of her professional experiences. I encourage you to put questions in the chat, and because we've reserved extra time for Q&A. And Lisa, I will monitor the chat while you're speaking and help to introduce those questions as they arise. Do you prefer to take questions at the end or while you're speaking?
I prefer to take, I am most interested in this being as much of a conversation as possible. And if this becomes a great conversation and we never get to my slides, that is absolutely a success in my mind.
Okay,
so
fantastic.
Feel free to interrupt, ask anything. My current plan, just so everyone here knows, is to sort of do a quick pass through my background and the sort of strange way I got from being a UX person to being a platform product manager who works on things that mostly don't have user experiences. But and then I can take you through a few more slides on platform product management and some of how it ties back in, if that is of interest. But if the questions are more interesting, awesome.
In which case, to the students, I will say, or anyone attending, please do not hold your questions to the end. Go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll make sure we get to them. So with that, Lisa, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, everyone. I still in many ways think of myself as a UXer, even though, as I just mentioned, I now work in product leadership and in particular in platform product management, which I actually got to, and I'll get to that story, by following user experience problems and being really surprised at what needed to be fixed to fix those problems. I ended up in UX pretty randomly. I went to law school, as was just mentioned, which I didn't particularly enjoy, but gave me a lot of time to play around online because I had internet access and which wasn't so common then. And I learned more and I became a coder and taught myself stuff because it was kind of fun. And it kept me distracted from law school, which I was miserable at. Graduated law school, didn't know what I was going to do, was offered a role at one of the first web design agencies, and I think my interview was something like, do you know what HTML stands for? And since I could answer that question, they figured I knew as much as anybody else did. Should give you a hint of how long ago that was. But in any case, I went in there and I wouldn't have been able to articulate it then, but that was sort of when I started doing user experience. I was in a room full of people, coders. Not entirely surprisingly, I was the only woman there, but that may or may not be relevant. And everybody else was looking at really cool, interesting things. What new features can we build? What can we put on this website? What is the underlying metaphor of the website that we can pitch to our customers, because we are sort of an online agency? And I was like, who are the users? What are they trying to do? What are they trying to learn? Where are they trying to go? Which was a very, very different mindset than anybody else in the room. And it was an interesting experience, and it sort of set the direction I was going, but I really did not have an awareness at the time that it was a discipline, or that there was sort of stuff to learn, or ways to dig deeper, or a lot education I could get on the topic. I just found myself there trying to figure things out. From there, I went to a couple of startups. They all imploded. It happens. And from there, I ended up taking a job out of all places, IBM, which was pretty far off of anything that I could have imagined. But it was actually a stroke of luck. And not just because it kept me employed through a recession, but because I ended up working with a team of people who had been doing user-centered design, some of whom for 15, 20 years, which introduced me to a whole frame of reference, a whole way of thinking. It was a real education. And that was when I went back and got the master's degree in information management as well, because it really became clear to me that there were academic disciplines out there I could learn from. There was a history, that this wasn't just me being the weird one in the room saying, but what about the users? That there was really something, there was a there, which had not been so obvious. I think it's easier to see now, and there are many more programs and things like that. But I got lucky. I got really lucky that I ended up in what was a massive corporation and seemed overwhelming. I was convinced, all right, I wasn't wrong, that it would be very rigid, but also gave me access to some amazing people with like PhDs in psychology who were doing user research, ideas about iterative design testing, all sorts of how to balance iterative design testing with a market research person who was very like, market research is done this way. I'm like, but that's not what we need. And sort of the back and forth. So that was kind of strange that it ended up being where I got my first deep understanding of design thinking, and went from it kind of being haphazardly how I approach things, design-ish thinking, you might say, to really understanding that you can have a process, you can have a way to work through things and really have massive, massive impact based on that. Also got really lucky there. I had a VP who didn't seem to mind when I was like, you're wrong, in big meetings, and kind of was ready to learn about web stuff that he knew he didn't know, and didn't freak out at this kid basically calling him out in front of everyone. That was awesome. And I didn't realize at the time just how awesome it was. But in any case, the other really important things I had to learn there was working across disciplines. This was the first place I was where there were, these people are engineers, these people build, these people do design, these people are marketing, these people are other things, these people are legal, these people are all of the different other types of facility. Communications was another big one. These were all the different sort of types of people you really had to figure out how to work with to move forward. And sales, that was another big one. And if you couldn't work across all of them, if you couldn't figure out how to manage them as your stakeholders, you weren't going to go anywhere. So it was all of the things I was so frustrated about at the time, where I was just like, I know what I'm doing. I'm right. You should let me go do this. Have been some of the most useful things I learned in terms of being able to move forward and work everywhere else, because you always have to be able to work cross organization. You have to be able to put yourself in the mindset of whoever you're talking to and pitch why what you're doing is right based on what their goals are, not based on what you know is right. If they care about something that's infinitely small, but they care deeply about it, don't talk about the rest of your project, even if it's really cool. Just talk about the bit that's there. And another couple of things I learned there that were really, really useful is that same VP who was like, okay, whatever, I'm not going to worry about it. basically sat me down and said, when you go into any project or initiative, define your success metrics up front. If you don't define your success metrics up front, you'll get to the end of the project and you'll say, isn't this awesome? And everyone else will say, that wasn't what we agreed to. That wasn't what I expected. Yes, but. And it's just really important to have that clarity. I mean, PMs do this as well, which is try and get things in place up front. But even for user experience, make sure there's sort of an understanding of what's great, what people want up front and what works. Are there metrics? Are they quantitative or qualitative metrics? Either of them can work depending on the context. Are they things like CSAT or time on task or conversion or brand awareness or completion rate of particular task flows or workflows? Those are all different things, and some of them can conflict with each other at various points in time. So it's just a really critical thing to know what your target is when you start, because I've seen too many times when people are like, I can go out and do the research and find all of this really cool things, and we've got all of these big discoveries, and we really are excited about all the stuff we want to do. And then they can't get any buy-in because they haven't set up the right frameworks to say, and this is why it will help, and this is why it will drive the business. It's awesome and our users will love it is something that user experience people will relate to, and a lot of product people will relate to, and the finance and revenue team won't care about. That's not fair. That's absolutely not fair. I'm exaggerating, but it is something I see a lot, which is you have to balance how you're communicating those things to other people. So I left IBM and did 2 brief stints at other large corporations, both of which were miserable for totally different reasons, and then got hired into Google. And I think that's when a lot of the work that's sort of more well-known and more classic user experience really started. At Google, I was hired into New York as the user experience manager for the New York team. I was working for a California-based company and gradually learned that their definition of New York was anything not in California. So I actually had some direct reports in Seattle as the manager of the New York team, because sure. And then they said, but no, you're America's East. It was still like, Seattle? Like, but you've got Brazil. I'm like, okay, that is America's, that is East. But you know, you rolled with it. It was an interesting time. Google was growing like crazy. Everything was split. There was no organization. There were no sort of product functions. Everybody was chasing everything all at once. And so there are people working on everything you can imagine on the team. I had people working on search. I had people working on news. I had people working on ads. I had people working on Orkut, which was a social network that at that point in time was still very popular in Brazil. So the range of experiences and exposure was amazing. That was also a place I learned a ton. And one of the things I learned is, while I've got a great mind for process and thinking through and figuring out how to make things happen, other people are actually much better at the hands-on design work than I am. And my trying to keep up, as it were, in that environment was not helpful to anyone, least of all myself. I was great at coaching and managing it, helping them figure things out. That was a fascinating experience. I then ended up, there were some reorgs, and I ended up being the manager in charge of all of the advertising mission, all of the advertising folks, UXers, and that team grew to be about 80 people by the time I left that role. And that was another example in, you have to know who your stakeholders are and manage them, because I was trying to do the right thing. I had user experience researchers who came back with if you make these changes to these things, we can track how it's going to be millions of dollars in savings. We know anyone who makes it through this flow, we see an uplift of 50% in their overall spend. here are the 10 places along the flow that people get blocked. And even when we could prove things were that clearly, it was pretty hard to get engineering to build them, because I literally had someone say, our job is to launch features, not to fix features. And I don't think that attitude is the same attitude at Google anymore, but it was really an early example of having to sell UX. And even when you think you've sold it, you find out you're getting pushed aside by whether or not the engineers think they can get promoted by doing the work you're asking them to do. So it's, once again, how do you frame it? How do you work with it? How do you do it?
So
and
I'm going to jump in here. We've got one question
awesome.
from Diana, she's asking a question sort of contrasting maybe your work at the New York Times with Google and thinking about the buy versus build it, right? Buy it or build it discussions, the differences across the two organizations, or when you should pay for services for someone to build versus pushing that internal build.
That's a great question, and it comes up a lot. In the early days at Google, the question of build versus buy was crazy because you built everything. Didn't matter what it was, you built it. As the company got more mature, it became increasingly clear that that was a terrible idea. So even at Google, there were certain systems like HR systems and some of the other systems that we did end up buying. But for the most part at Google, the gut reaction was always, take this how you will, but the gut reaction was, we have the best engineers in the world. Why would we buy anything when we can build it better? Lots of reasons, including they could be working on much more interesting stuff than HR applications, for example, but different question. So at Google, we didn't do a lot of buying. At the New York Times, it is a very different scenario, and we put a lot of thought into what we build versus what we buy. And I've been involved in one decision that started out with go figure out what we should buy, and ended up being no, we're going to build it. And another decision where it's, of course, we're going to build this. And in the end, we ended up bringing in a third party and taking a buy solution. Neither of those ended where I would have thought they ended. I knew what I was going to do, and we went through the work and the process and ended up elsewhere. In short, anytime it's something like HR, legal, anything like that, where there are going to be lots of small changes, worldwide, international, legal things, details about how things happen, tax rates, anything like that, that's not strategic. That's not a core value. That's what you're trying to drive. Those things, and maintenance will take so much time if you have to continue to update every time a tax rate changes. You want somebody else to be doing that. You want that amortized over everyone in the industry, not just you doing it. So first of all, if it's that sort of, I'm saying generic, I don't want to imply not useful when I say generic, but maybe common is a better word. When so many people have the same things and it's not your core strategic goal, that's when you really need to be looking at it. So, and on the other hand, if it is your core strategic goal, you absolutely should be building it. When I interviewed at the New York Times, I actually asked that question of Meredith Levian, who was at the time the COO and is now the CEO. And I'm like, how do you think about build versus buy? And her response was also, is it strategic or not? And she sort of said to me, our publishing system is the heart and soul of who we are and what we do and how we work. We build that. Come to me with anything else you're considering buying and we'll talk. But she was very clear that what was our strategic and mission-based core that had to be ours, with the understanding that anything else should be assessed as appropriate, and you figure it out. For the two examples I gave of build versus buy going the wrong way, when I first started at the Times, I was I was told we have this message sending system, and 13 people have spun up different systems as well because everybody hates the main one. And so we've got no visibility into anything. We know the main one's terrible. Figure out what we should go buy. That was the task. And I put someone on it who with a ton of messaging experience, and he came back to me and said, okay, I've talked to 13 different email service providers. We have to build. I'm like, excuse me. The cost per send of what we could do ourselves was such a drastic difference. And we send billions of emails a year. We send just billions of them. I don't know the exact numbers. But so for us, cost ended up being prohibitive to move to any third party. Plus, it turned out most third parties heard how much we send and were like, ooh, we could maybe scale up to do that, which is not what you'd call reassuring when you're looking for a third party for their expertise. So in the end, we've done a complete re-architecture of that system and built it internally. And it's taken 2.5 years of focused work, but it's been pretty successful. And we're really happy with how that has gone. But that was a case where we thought it was ridiculous for us to buy until we did the deep analysis and went, wait, there's something we're not considering here, which is cost per send and cost per email. And when we took that analysis in, it changed everything. On the flip side, we're doing some work to move on to a buy product for some of our subscription management work. And that's a place where initially my gut reaction was certainly that this is core and strategic. But we did more research and we went out and we talked to people and we talked to other subscription-based organizations, see what they did, and came to the conclusion that there are areas of the subscription platform that we need to own as strategic, and we want to own as strategic. But there are also others that every single person deals with billing. We don't need to build a billing system. There are some pieces of payments we do need to build, as it turns out, to get more flexibility and to work well internationally. But there are also big pieces of that payment stack that we can't do. I'm seeing questions come in, but I'll finish this and then we can move on to those. But so in any case, it's been the core question I have, is it strategic? Is it unique? Is there a cost-based reason that you can do it so much better? And cost-based has to take into account keeping a staff of people to build, run, maintain, and maintain's always the biggest expense and the one nobody thinks about. So that was a very long-winded with multiple examples of things I've seen in working through build buy.
That's really useful. I think those examples actually really help heighten how different organizations think about what those North Star metrics should be, which is a lead into this next question for the messaging systems. So you're talking about what were those North Star metrics? Did leadership care deeply about revenue, but maybe that depended on the users of the platform to send effective messages? Like how did that shake out?
So we think about our email sends very differently depending on what they are. So there is a chunk of our email and virtually all of our push messaging notification that's editorial driven. It's news cycle driven or subscription newsletters or things like that. Certainly things that are news cycle driven are in a very unique category, because for those, I think our North Star metric for our push breaking news headline is literally how quickly can we get it to everybody's phone. If it's breaking news and you're 15 minutes delayed, it's done. In this world, it's can you get it there immediately? And so for push, a lot of it is that. When we get into email messaging, it gets very complex and different people want different things. Email includes both our editorial email and it includes some basic marketing email. And the third category it includes that everyone always forgets is transactional email. Hi, your account, we're raising our rates and next year you'll pay $1 more. or your credit card is expired. So that's another big thing. And depending on who you are, you have very different goals. So there wasn't a single North Star metric across all of those systems and ideas. What we focused on are things like deliverability. Our emails land in email boxes. Reception. Are people clicking on the emails? How are people coming to the site after they read the emails? For our free emails, like the daily, how many we send that, how many of the billions of people who get, or it's not billions, but how many of the very many people who get the daily every day subscribe, come back, read stuff online, engage online. So for some types of email, it is strictly revenue. For others, it is engagement, it is interaction, it is expanding our reach, it is increasing the awareness of the New York Times amongst a broader audience who might not come directly to the site, but might receive a forward of an interesting newsletter that somebody did. And
Thanks.
then, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, please finish. Sorry. I was just going to jump in with another question. So
go for it. Go for it.
All right. So Bang asks, is curious. Actually, I am curious about this too. Your process for managing cross-functional partners effectively, you know, when you're talking to product and engineering and sales, as someone who cares deeply about UX, especially when there's a lack of alignment among different disciplines. One of the questions that I had written down before our talk today, which I'll tack onto this, was, can you think of an example, like the hardest person that you've encountered in your career, the hardest person to convince of the importance of UX and how you handled it? Or maybe just one of the tough cases, if not the toughest.
I'm absolutely thinking of the toughest, but I totally failed to convince that person. So that's not a great example in this context. But I spend a lot of time in particular working with engineering and trying to get them to understand what UX brings to the table and why this happens. In the slides, for example, and it varies. Sometimes I have an example I sometimes talk to aligned with the slides. That is when I was at Google, I was asked to fix a user experience problem. I was a product manager already, but I was asked to fix this user experience problem with how long it was taking people to set up mobile phones. It was taking people, I don't know, I think it was 90 minutes to set up a mobile phone to use on our internal systems. And literally, if you read the instructions, there was a line that says, now put your phone down for 45 minutes and come back later. It was crazy. And I was asked to fix this, and I figured it would be this is actually how I ended up in platform and infrastructure work. I thought it would be an easy fix. Okay, clearly there's just not clarity. I'll build an app, we'll get it out there, it'll solve everything. I was so wrong. I was so naive. It turned out that 45-minute delay in that case was because information had to propagate across a wide number of internal pipelines to get to all of the systems, so they'd know that access was allowed. So fixing the user experience on the device wasn't going to do anything if it still took 45 minutes for all those systems to get online. That was a place where having people, what fundamentally changed, it was somebody recorded themselves setting up a phone, including like a running clock for the 45 minutes. And that got distributed. And that was sufficiently disconcerting to a large number of people to realize just how bad it was. And it became a major priority across the company. So often something like that, where you can show something rather than telling it, is going to be much more effective. That's when there's sort of prioritization block, when you want to sort of show where things need to go. My biggest thing, and I've been working on how to best articulate this, is what I sort of have started thinking of as product managing my stakeholders, which is, who are my stakeholders? All of them, across all of the different positions I need. Maybe it's engineering people, maybe it's sales, maybe it's marketing, maybe it's the executive over here who has a pet project that overlaps that's never been successful, but they're not going to want to give it up. I mean, it doesn't really matter what it is. And if people have common, and grouping them, if people have common interests, pitch to them uniquely without all of the others in the room. If people have specific, if there's very unique interests, hey, this is going to help you this way. And trying to pull each of the stakeholders along directly before you pull everybody together in a room, and make sure you at least have the majority of people already aligned with what you're trying to do. So it's sort of very strategic in terms of how I think about managing stakeholders. I try and, like, sometimes I go so far as to write down, here are the people I have to work with across the disciplines with different needs and different organizations. What are their goals in this project? And I will literally write down a page of, this is this person I need to work with. Here's their list of goals. This is this person. Here's their list of goals. And figure out how to tailor my approach to get alignment based on making myself think about what matters to them, even if it's not what I care about. So
that is actually a great lead into a question that was just posted. Before I ask it, though, I'm just going to say for the participants here, I think to hear that there are still people you can't convince, like, that's valuable for all of us to know that even someone at your level of career. But Veronica has a question which really, I think, just picks up on what you were just saying. Can you give any advice to people who are just starting or have 2 or 3 years experience in the industry, how to get on a UX leadership career path, like the one you've been on?
It so much depends on where you are and what organization you're in and how supportive they are and whether the teams are growing and whether there is, like, really a nice career path where, if I need to do X, then I need to do Y. You look at big tech, and for better and worse, they're like, at this level, you're supposed to be this. And you can literally look and say, I need to learn how to do these things to get to the next level, and these things to get to the next level. The other way is it's sort of smaller, more flexible companies where it's really about finding places where you can really have impact and really show your value, even if it's not what's sort of officially in your job description. I mean, I'm not saying sort of drop everything. I'm saying that bring ideas, show you can convince people, show you can drive to solutions. All right, I will say that is the one thing I tell everybody above a certain level who comes to me, which is, don't bring me problems, come in with at least a proposal for some way to fix the problems. It may not be good. You may come in and say, here are the 3 things I've considered, and I don't like any of them, but I can't come up with anything else. Don't be the person who walks in and says, hi, there's a problem. Here, have it. That is does not reflect somebody who's ready for a broader leadership role. Let's just put it like that. So in any case, I don't have a great answer. There's not one set of skills. It's how do you work with people? How do you work cross-functionally? Can you coach and mentor and help drive other folks? Can you help bring other people's careers along? And some of those are things you can decide to work on and show and learn about, even when you're more junior. Or maybe you build up a specialty skill and then work on how do you evangelize that and how do you bring that forward to other people as a way to demonstrate how you can uplift the whole team and not just your own individual work. I don't know if any of that is helpful.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That's helpful. But it kind of sounds to me like it's easier for a smaller organization where, there's a little more flexibility between roles. Is this kind of like what you're also saying?
It's both easier and harder. It's easier in that you have more flexibility to create your own path and figure out how to move forward and how to show your value. It's harder in that you may have to convince more people that this is a role that can have a bigger job, that there are that there is more user experience than they see thus far, that there's a reason to grow a team or grow people. At big companies, and it's not just about the company size, it's about whether people have very clearly defined job ladders and job paths. At those bigger companies, it's much easier to know what to do next to move ahead, but it can be much harder to actually do that. And if you have skills or interests or work that is slightly orthogonal to that job ladder, it can be a real problem. And the best example I have of that one is I really struggled at Google with getting promoted because I was working in a platform space that didn't have the metrics that everybody else was being assessed on for product management promotions. And they didn't know what to do with me. Everyone was like, everyone was happy with the work. I was getting a lot of praise. I was being given bigger and bigger and bigger initiatives. But because the job ladder said you must show X, and my job didn't show X, didn't matter how much other positive impact I had, I couldn't quite get past that hurdle there. So
And what did you do to change it? Was it change of the company? Gotcha. Okay. Well, thanks a lot for sharing.
I mean, that was one of the things that drove me out of Google, was the real lack of recognition for the work I was doing. And it just made it not worth it anymore.
Thank you for sharing that. I thought actually that's some great actionable advice. So thank you. I get that question from students a lot of how to get on a leadership path. So Shirley has a question. You mentioned there were many internal teams building similar competing systems. This was at Google, I assume. How do you get the company to align on one internal tool? Top-down enforcement? How do you balance carrots and sticks?
Okay, top-down enforcement rarely works. Well, let me take a step back. It depends on the type of organization. If you're in an organization with a lot of engineers, top-down enforcement rarely works because everybody will go off and build their own thing and do workarounds and avoid you. And you will find out later that there are all sorts of things that should never have happened. And they're probably full of security holes and they create all sorts of other problems. And then you have to shut them all down. It's a mess. This is why I feel like even when I do platform product management, so I'm developing things for engineers to in turn develop things for our end users. And I'm very focused on what they need, how to make them happy, figuring out what makes their workflow work really well, because carrots work so much better than sticks. Eventually you do have to sometimes say, no, you will do this. And there are places where there are bottlenecks, such as you cannot post to our production servers if you aren't using this system. So that's a bottleneck. But I will say that it really varies based on who you're designing for. I mean, an example, everybody always hates their performance management system. Guess what? HR mandates it to remain employed at most companies. You have to use it. That can be described as a real stick scenario, and everyone's always miserable, but you do it anyway. But when you are dealing with engineers and teams that can build their own things, it gets much carrot is the way to go whenever possible.
Thank you. I'm going to jump in with a question because it might provide some framing for some of the questions that are coming up. How would you talk about the difference between doing product management work with that UX lens and then platform product management you're doing now?
So there are a couple of different pieces, and actually this is where I might show one slide. Let me see if I can make that happen. But so as a platform product manager, I am kind of building. I sort of feel like they're two different questions, and I'm trying to figure out the right way to parse them out. One is, what is the overall difference between UX and product management? There is more and more overlap as you get to be more senior as a UXer with the sort of product management space. And lots of people who start in user experience do more and more of the strategic work and the long-term thinking and the growth and where should we be going. And that is where UXers really shine as product managers. So that's sort of what I see. There's a lot of overlap in that process, in that path. PMs have a lot of other responsibilities that designers don't, but designers, researchers, UXers do different types of work that has different payoff. See if I can share. There we go. Can you see a slide?
That's great. We see it.
Okay, so this is one of the ways I've been framing what I do as a platform product manager. I joke that I don't design for the end users. The end users are, the people who come are readers. The end users are game players, all of this. I don't design for them. I design for all of the people who are building the pieces that they'll all be using, the features, the functionality, the rest of it. So I think about it as really, really designing for a sort of set of middle users. But the important thing to keep in mind is when you're designing for middle users, you should also be thinking about where they're going for the end users as well. You need to be looking at both halves of that. And that's sort of one of the real ways I think about platform product management, is how you move from looking at platform teams on through to the middle users who are your target audience, your direct users, to the end users that they're designing for. I think with sort of more standard, more well-known product management, you're designing from that far left bubble to the far right bubble, and and the people in the green bubble are your team rather than are your users. Did that help?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
So that is my very quick overview, one, of what is platform product management, and two, UX versus PM.
Okay, Julie, I see your question there. I'm gonna give you the bully pulpit. Julie, you want to?
I'm sure I can ask it. Yeah. I just want to get in the queue. I was just reflecting on how much time you spend talking with engineers and educating engineers and thinking about UX. And given that we're a pretty interdisciplinary department, but we're also working with the rest of the college engineering on educating engineers about human-centered design. And so, given that you interact with a lot of engineers, what do you wish more of them knew? Like, are there things that we should be integrating into our coursework or classes, or offering to non-HCDE students and other engineering disciplines about UX, and thinking about that from that perspective?
I think one of the biggest gaps I see when I work with engineers that ties into user experience and product management both is that engineers tend to be brilliant and amazingly focused on solving the problem immediately in front of them. Where both PM and UX really come in and can be such a helpful group addition, et cetera, is the horizontal, because people aren't ever just dealing with that one problem. They have to deal with the other 15 steps of the process that the problem's embedded in. And that working with UX can help understand what is that end-to-end process that the user is actually part of. What is that user journey? How do you deliver against it? And how does the problem you're solving fit in with the next problem and the next problem? And that it's not about trying to break things, or trying to make things harder. It's about trying to put things in an end-to-end framework. That means that your work can shine as well as all of the rest of it, because people aren't so frustrated that they are going to 6 different sites for a simple activity.
No, thanks. That's a great perspective.
We've got someone in the audience who also holds a law degree and also did not enjoy the process of getting that law degree. And Lenny is wondering, did that legal background help you in your UX product career at all? Do you see like any law tech companies having similar roles? Anything to recuperate there?
I definitely have in a couple of places used my law degree. I worked on some patent systems at Google that were kind of really interesting, and how you think through and assess patents, and that used some of my legal background. I think the biggest thing that studying law gives you that becomes useful is you pull together so many different sources and case law and the arguing by analogy and pulling all of the different pieces from so many disconnected places and framing them in a coherent argument. That skills that you also develop in other parts of academia. So it's not law school unique, but the skills I developed there in doing that and being crisp. And also when people are talking about requirements, I'm always the one in the room who's pointing out all the ways they could be misread, because some of the legal work about reading very carefully, those things have all tied in. There's not a sort of, I can't say, I've always wondered what it would be like to go work at, Westlaw or LexisNexis or some of these visualization companies that do real visualization to help lawyers and legal groups. I haven't done that to any great extent, but I do find the legal work is valuable, both for that, and about once a year somebody says, you can't say that, you're not a lawyer. And that moment is always so nice. So, I mean, not worth 3 years of law school, but hey, I did the 3 years of law school. I may as well enjoy that.
It's great. This was a question Diane asked a bit ago. She appreciates the fun features. So I appreciate the fun features promoted on the New York Times site, like the generate a hot take experience or the news quizzes. Do these concepts tend to come from and get funded by your organization, or do newsroom folks ever come to you with these kinds of ideas, or where do they come from?
They mostly, though not always, come from the newsroom. And depending on what needs to happen to enable them, that makes a big difference about whether my teams get involved or whether some of the sort of feature teams who build on top of my platforms get involved. There's even actually an interactive team within the newsroom itself that has a lot of technologists on it that focuses on things like the visual journalism and some of the more in-depth interactive journalism we do. So there isn't, I don't want to imply there's a strict line between tech and journalism. There isn't. But my team is further away from that. I just kind of hear about a lot of that secondhand and say, oh, that's cool, and try and beat my average on the news quiz every week.
Well, we won't ask you to disclose any upcoming features that are still under wraps. Jody's got a question here. You mentioned the work that you do to understand the goals of your multiple stakeholders. And the question is, do you find it easier to speak to their goals if you know more about their type of role, like learning about marketing or what happens in the C-suite, et cetera? Is this something that just happens over time, or have you gone out and done some targeted learning?
So I have definitely done some targeted learning at various points in time. When I was working on mobile devices, all of it unexpectedly sort of at Google. And suddenly I was working with the security team every day. I found myself buying a book on Android security and trying to work my way through it, which, not exactly, that was hard. But so I absolutely research and go deep on things related to what I'm doing. And sometimes that is about the job roles other people have. To be honest, a lot of the understanding about what people care about and what their goals as a general statement based on role is pattern recognition. You see it more, and you're like, oh, this is probably what's going on there. The other piece of it, though, is don't get too blinded by the titles and the job descriptions. Doesn't matter how senior people are, they're still people, and they still have their own motives that may or may not have anything to do with them. I met with somebody, I do my best to avoid that, though I know I have it. I met with somebody who's brand new to the Times the other day, and they said, why is this piece of work here instead of in your org? And I'm like, because I'm really angry at the person who was trying to throw it over the fence to us. So I said no. And I was like, okay, I admit having been grouchy for a week, I will now accept it if it's the right thing to do and it comes with the right resources. I will always fairly quickly get to the point I put my company first hat on. But and I'm more honest than most people about admitting some of those things. The number of times you'll find out something didn't happen or did happen because of something that happened between two people 4 years ago is ludicrous. So it's not just knowing the work, it's knowing the people, knowing the culture, and knowing the history. Because sometimes it has nothing to do with the work. It has to do with always having these people in the room at the same time, or never having these people in the room at the same time. People are people. All of the same problems you see everywhere else still exist in business, just people like to pretend they don't.
That is such good advice. That's the moment where we run up against the limitations of the classroom and what we can teach in the classroom, and then what it means to go and deploy these skills in the world.